First of all, I'm a woodlot owner as well. Oh, woodland. Simon always gives me heck when I say woodlot owner, but I was glad Luther used the term. So anyway, they're synonymous. So I'm going to try to keep this to 15 minutes. I have my timer here, and start. And then James is going to follow up a bit afterwards. So my talk is going to be just about the ecology, the ecological part of ecological forestry. And then James is going to talk about the SGEM that Deputy Minister talked about earlier, and then we'll have questions afterwards. So hopefully we can have about 10-15 minutes for questions. So ecological forestry isn't a new concept. It's been in the books for about 30 years. And I think perhaps as woodlot owners, we've been practicing ecological forestry maybe a little longer than that. And as I go through the slides this morning, you'll probably sense that maybe some of the things as woodlot owners, we're a little reluctant to leave live trees around for deadwood later on, you know. So that's something of an approach that has changed as we look at getting more of the ecology into our forestry practices. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to use this. That was good. Chris? What did I do?
So it's just the right side that forwards it.
Oh, we're in
Let's go back up.
So you need to start it again.
Okay, that's a good place right there. Okay, so basically Dr. Leahy defined it as forestry that strives to emulate the natural processes that would affect those stands in the absence of forestry. I might have put in the absence of people there, but more or less the same thing. And really, it becomes a bit of a balancing act as we try to keep all the pieces, all the processes that would be there ecologically, while still getting some forestry products that we need. We can't not think that we will not be needing forestry products as we go forward. And so it's this balancing act that needs to be done so that we can keep these natural processes that are influencing that forest every day and will be influencing it into the future, and will be helping it to adapt to the climate changes that will be coming. And it won't be the first time forests have adapted to climate changes, but anyway, these natural processes include things like trying to keep the species composition of the stand, the forest, the biodiversity features, the stand structure, the age class, and the way that the forest renews itself over time. So in the forest review, Dr. Leahy suggested that the best way we can do that is to incorporate the disturbances that would occur naturally in the forest. And this idea of natural disturbance-based management isn't new either. It has been in the back of a lot of forestry across the continent and elsewhere, and it's basically the idea of trying to incorporate how this forest responds to the disturbances that it would impact it without us being there. So it is one of the main driving forces behind this ecological forestry approach. So it's not a complex thing when it comes to the things that we need to understand, but there's a lot of pieces to it. So basically, I'm just going to look at what is a natural disturbance regime. So it's a combination of about four things. And when we think of disturbances, we think of the agents themselves. And in this province, we have, several agents that are influencing the forest. Hurricane and wind probably being our biggest one. And then, of course, fire, insects, disease, even beavers and porcupines could probably be considered part of that disturbance history. But overall, those are the big ones. And then we had the idea that not always will they be of the same severity. So we've seen hurricanes blow down parts of stands, all of the stand. Fires, as we know, can be fairly devastating, or they can just be a light burn underneath. And the same with insects and disease. So those are two things that we need to understand when we describe a natural disturbance regime for a piece of land or a forest. The extent, how far and wide does this disturbance influence the forest? Sometimes it's just an individual tree. Other times it could be a stand, or it could be all the forest in a particular part of the province, or it could be province-wide. So that's another factor that goes into describing this regime. And then finally, frequency. Does it occur annually, every 100 years, every 1,000 years? How frequent are these things? So when we put all these things together, we come up with what we describe as a natural disturbance regime. And in the Acadian forest that most of Nova Scotia represents, we have what is now becoming realized as a multi-agent disturbance regime on a lot of our forest types. The Deputy Minister mentioned that Dr. Leahy recommended that we get a better, maybe not better, but more information on natural disturbance regimes. And so in the last 2 years, a team of scientists put together the two reports that she mentioned. One was led by Dr. McLean from the University of New Brunswick, and the other one was led by Dr. Taylor from the Canadian Forestry Service. And both these papers are providing the type of information we need to put this disturbance-based management into our forest practices. One other thing we sort of need to recognize is that when a forest is disturbed, especially a stand level disturbance, so if we started back at ground zero again, it goes through a series of steps or stages to get to the late successional forest or the climax forest for that particular part of or that particular piece of ground. So these pathways can be complex or they can be fairly simple. It depends on the disturbance and it depends on the severity of the disturbance. This is a fairly simple photo showing, where a stand initiating event turned into probably a red maple birch type forest, and then over time it will succeed into maybe a red spruce, a yellow birch, and then eventually maybe into the red spruce hemlock forest. That would be the late successional or climax forest. So it's important to understand when we're looking at our forest where we are in the successional pathway of things. And that may influence how we incorporate forest management practices. So where do we look at applying ecological forestry? Excuse me. It could be that we need to look at it in the bigger ecosystem, like the landscape. So when I talk about landscapes, a good example of a landscape might be the Cobequid Hills, where we have that tolerant hardwood forest, or another landscape could be the Annapolis Valley, something like that, or the Musquodoboit, Stewiacke valleys. So these are landscapes, and we need to recognize that when we look at biodiversity, maybe we need to recognize how biodiversity is working at that scale of landscape or that scale of ecosystem. We also need to recognize that biodiversity could be managed or looked at or incorporated at the stand level, or even at the tree. Individual tree could be considered an important aspect or scale of incorporating biodiversity into the ecological forestry concept. I think it's important to recognize as woodland owners that what we do at our woodlot or woodland may be good there, but it may not be good for the landscape as a whole. It could be that we're the last deer yard on the landscape, or we're the last connection between two landscapes or something. So it's important that as woodland owners we recognize where we are in the big picture, because what we do at the stand level may be the right thing, but it may not be the right thing at the landscape, and vice versa. So understanding where we are in terms of ecology, disturbances, biodiversity is important at several scales, and each level informs the other. So as we go into the rest of the talk this morning on this ecological forestry, most of it will be at the stand level. So it's important that, this is probably something, biodiversity features, we've probably always recognized some of them, but maybe not all of them. And I haven't listed all of them there. And the book that Simon has at the back there, this book here is a pretty good guide to some of the things that, you might consider as important biodiversity features at the stand level. It's hard to believe I already used up 10 minutes, but anyway. One thing that we don't think about a lot, maybe, is soils. And I think, there's a lot of biodiversity issues in the soils. Soils are also important for maintaining the productivity of the ecosystem. So, of all those things there, I think, as we move forward, soils and how we maintain site productivity is a very important biodiversity feature. So, I'm just going to look at a few ecosystems across the province. The way the ecological forestry approach on Crown land is working right now is we're looking at forest groups. And these forest groups are defined in this publication, Forest Ecosystem Classification for the province. And oh yeah, I probably should mention also that the landscape type ecosystems are also described in this document, Ecological Land Classification for Nova Scotia. So both those documents are online. There are a few hard copies available if you'd like one. Next slide maybe is more familiar to a lot of you, is your Tolerant Hardwood forest group type. Again, here we have a disturbance regime where we have multi-agents. And the severity can be individual trees to small gaps. It's very seldom that you have a stand replacing disturbance here. However, the extent can be local to landscape. So, for example, the beech canker has influenced all the forest in every landscape. And perhaps the beech flea beetle that's coming along right now is going to influence every beech tree in the province. So again, it can be very local. It can just be a particular tree that succumbs to fungus and dies. And the frequency is quite variable. Obviously, hurricanes don't come every year, and so we can have individual trees dying every year, but we can have patches occurring maybe every 100 years. Again, this is a different forest than the balsam fir. It's a long-lived forest of yellow birch and sugar maple and beech. It develops an uneven aged structure, and it's late successional. And there's a lot, I would think there's are there more biodiversity features in any one particular forest? Well, I tend to think there is in the tolerant hardwoods. A lot more. Vernal pools is an easy one for us to sort of get our head around. So I'm going to, one more slide. Well, there's two more. This one, a lot of us have red spruce hemlock type woodlands. Again, multi-agent disturbances. A lot of things can influence this forest, and the severity can be variable. Again, it can be individual tree, like in this photo where we have this is at Abraham Lake, and this is an old growth forest. The ones that are dying are the oldest trees. They're getting hit by spruce bark beetle. So again, the ecological approach here would be maybe partial harvest of certain trees. But again, this has a wide range of disturbance extent. It can be very small to landscape wide. Again, if we had a particular insect attack that red spruce forest, it could take out trees across the landscape. Again, it's an uneven age type forest that gets into because of the long-lived species of red spruce and hemlock, and there can be multi-successional stages here. This one is late successional, but if this was burned, it would go right back to a pioneer stage and then work up through a bunch of successional stages to get to this again. So again, biodiversity features are quite, there's quite a variety of them in this type of forest. Now that's about my time. when James is going to come on, but other forests in the province includes something like a black spruce forest, or a black spruce white pine forest, or the coastal spruce fir forest. We have a lot of products that are helping us get an understanding, a lot of tools that we've developed over the years. We didn't develop all these tools in the last couple of years. These have taken 10, 20 years to get to this point of having these available. But what I'd like to suggest is that we've got 28 plus tree species out there. We're surrounded by 13,000 kilometers of coastline. We've got 1,500 feet of elevation. We've got one of the most complex geology bedrock underneath us anywhere in Canada. And we've got climatic zones across the province from Cape Sable to Cape North that are quite different. I don't believe that we can think one size fits all when we come up with forest management approaches in this ecological context. I think we have to recognize that there's a lot of variability out there, and that we have to recognize that variability to be ecological. So, James,